Everyone knows the sound of the wind through the pines. It's a shiver, a long, drawn-out sigh that moves through the canopy in waves that makes you pull your jacket a little tighter and feel, for just a moment, that you are very small and the world is very large, and the two of you have an understanding that doesn't require words. But have you ever heard the wind beg for its life? My name is Silas. I've spent the last 10 years as a fire lookout in the Blackwood National Forest. I know this place the way you know a difficult relative. Every mood, every silence, every way it has of telling you something is wrong before the thing that's wrong has fully arrived. I'm used to the isolation. I'm used to the way the shadows of the Douglas fir stretch at sunset into those long skeletal fingers that reach for the tower. I'm used to the sounds that the mountain makes at 2 a.m. that have no name and no explanation. But 3 nights ago, the silence of the Blackwood didn't just break. It shattered. It started as a vibration. Not a sound yet. A frequency. Something so deep in the register that I felt it in my back, molars before I heard it anywhere else. The floorboards of the tower were humming with it. A subsonic pulse that made the dust rise from the wood grain and hang suspended in the air around me. And then, from the dark heart of the valley below, came the sound. A scream. Not a bird. I know every bird call in this forest, have known them for a decade, have used them to triangulate weather and direction and the movement of deer through the lower meadow. Not a mountain lion, not anything with a name in the biological record. A human woman, calling a name. My name. Silas, help me. It's cold. I raised the binoculars. I swept the tree line in the moonlight, every direction, systematically the way you do when you're trying to be professional about something that is dissolving your professionalism from the inside. And then I saw the trees. They weren't swaying. They weren't bending in wind. They were shuddering, the specific involuntary tremor of something in distress, and as the scream tore through the night again, I understood something that rewrote everything I thought I knew about this forest. The sound wasn't coming from between the trees. It was coming from inside them. I didn't leave the tower that night. I bolted the door and held my hunting rifle and sat with my back to the wall and watched the darkness until the darkness became gray, and the gray became the pale, sick dawn light of a morning that didn't feel like it should be allowed to exist after a night like that one. The screaming stopped sometime before sunrise, replaced by a fog that moved in from the valley floor and swallowed everything below the tower's catwalk in a single, slow inhalation. Sleep deprivation, I told myself. Thin mountain air. The wind finding some hollow trunk in exactly the wrong configuration to produce human-sounding resonance. I told myself these things all the way down the stairs and across the wet black earth to the perimeter sensors. And then I found the first throat. An ancient hemlock. Bark blackened and gnarled, the specific damage pattern of a lightning strike that had happened decades ago and left the tree alive but fundamentally altered. There was a split in the trunk, about 5 feet up. I've seen lightning splits before. They're ragged, explosive, the wood torn apart by the force of the discharge. This wasn't that. This was a surgical incision, clean edges, the depth and precision of something that knew exactly how far it needed to cut and stopped there. I leaned in. The smell stopped me. Not pine resin, not the earth smell of bark and decay that I associate with old growth, a hospital smell. Metallic and cloying and chemical, the smell of a room where biological processes are being managed rather than allowed to run their natural course. Inside the split, nestled in the sap and the wood grain, were vocal cords. Human vocal cords, stretched tight across the rings of the tree like the strings of an instrument, taut and pink and glistening. And they were vibrating. The forest around me was silent. No bird, no wind, no insect, but the tree was producing a sound. Below the threshold of hearing, at the frequency I had felt in my back teeth the night before. The tree was humming. I checked the others. Every third or fourth trunk had the same incision. Different sizes, different species. Hemlock, cedar, spruce, Douglas fir. But each one with this same careful opening, each one with its own biological installation. Some held vocal cords. Some held what appeared to be cochlear structures, the spiral architecture of the inner ear embedded in the heartwood. Some held structures I couldn't identify, biological forms I had no reference for, adapted from human anatomy into something the forest had required. The Blackwood wasn't a collection of trees. It was an anatomical archive. I found the backpack near the fourth tree I checked, snagged on a root, the nylon damp and stained. I recognized it from the missing persons report. A girl who had disappeared 3 weeks ago. Day hiker, no overnight gear, went in on a Wednesday and didn't come out. The search had been called after 5 days. Her journal was inside. The pages were swollen with moisture, the ink bleeding but readable. The entries tracked forward from her disappearance, the handwriting growing stranger as the dates progressed. More deliberate, more spaced, as if each letter required conscious effort. The last entry was dated 2 days after she went missing. The trees aren't eating me. They're practicing. They want to know how I sound when I'm afraid. I tried to radio the main station. The frequency was jammed, not the white noise of interference or equipment failure. A chorus. Thousands of voices layered over each other in a dissonant, shifting harmony. The sound of a stadium full of people all whispering their most private fears simultaneously, the sounds bleeding together into something that had the texture of language without the structure of it. I stood in the forest with the radio pressed to my ear and understood. The Blackwood wasn't a place. It was a device. A living, breathing, 10,000-year-old recording apparatus that had been patient in the way that only things without mortality can be patient, that had been building its collection, one voice at a time, one frequency at a time, every sound every creature had ever made within its boundary preserved in sap and wood fiber and the molecular memory of ancient, slow biological intelligence. And I was the only source of fresh audio left. I ran back to the tower. The stairs felt different. The wood was warm, not sun. Warm, not the stored warmth of ambient temperature, but body warm, the warmth of something with a circulatory system. I grabbed the handrail and my hand found a surface that gave slightly under pressure. I looked down. The grain of the wood, for just a moment, resolved into something that looked like teeth. I took my hand off the rail and climbed without touching anything. Every step I took on the stairs, every exhale, every involuntary sound I made, the creak of my boot, the catch of my breath, the half-word I formed and didn't complete, was being archived. The roots beneath my feet were a network. The violet sap in the water supply I'd been drinking for months had made me part of the network. I wasn't being watched by the Blackwood. I was being listened to. The fog reached the catwalk level sometime around the 60th hour. I couldn't see the ground. The tower was an island in white, floating in nothing, and then the knocking started on the windows. Not one point of contact, multiple, rhythmic, the specific pattern of fingers drumming. I looked out through the mist and the nearest fir tree had grown hands. Long, jointed wooden hands with too many segments in each finger, reaching for the window latch with the patient dexterity of something that had been practicing this movement for some time. Silas. My father's voice. Specific, precise, the exact timbre and cadence of a man who had been dead for 15 years. Not an approximation, not the way a dream reconstructs a voice from partial memory, but the real thing. The Blackwood had this recording. Somewhere in its archive, from some moment I couldn't place, it had captured my father's voice precisely enough to play it back without error. Why did you leave the stove on? You know the rules. A specific argument, age 12, a Tuesday in October. The forest wasn't mimicking sounds at random. It was mining the specific frequencies of my own stored experience, pulling the audio from my subconscious through the network I had been drinking into myself for months. I grabbed the gasoline canister. I grabbed the flare. If the Blackwood wanted to keep me as a permanent installation, it was going to have to fight for the privilege. I stepped out onto the catwalk. The air smelled of ozone and decay, and something sweet underneath both of them, the specific sweetness of biological processes running at maximum output. The trees below were vocalizing in unison, a sound like 1,000 engines failing simultaneously, a bass frequency that made the catwalk's metal grill hum in resonance beneath my boots. And I saw her. The girl from the missing persons report. She wasn't dead. She was fused into the trunk of a cedar at the valley's edge, her skin the color and texture of bark, her arms extended and incorporated into the tree's structure, her eyes replaced by amber sap that caught the light like gemstones. Her mouth was wide open, held open by the cedar's growth, and the forest was using her lungs as a bellows, driving air through her throat to produce sounds that her vocal cords had been optimized for over 3 weeks of patient modification. She looked up at me. I don't know if she could see me. I don't know if she was in there, behind the amber eyes, in the dark of what the forest had left her. But she was looking up at me, and I threw the gasoline at the reaching wooden hands and struck the flare and screamed at it to stop. Just stop, just for once in 10,000 years. Be quiet. Pine is volatile. The black would burn with a violet flame. And it didn't crackle. It shrieked. The screams of the archive released as the fire moved through it. Hikers from the 70s, children from a century before that, voices with no context I could attach them to, going back and back and back through the years the Blackwood had been collecting. The girl in the cedar. My father's voice, a second time, from somewhere in the burning canopy to my left. The trees began to move, not falling, not collapsing in the way of burning timber. Moving, their root systems dragging through the black earth, the massive tentacle-like structures hauling them away from the flames, not in retreat, but in formation. They were surrounding the tower, building a wall of burning wood around the source of the sound that had started the fire. They weren't trying to escape. They were building a cage. I looked at my hands. The skin was cracking at the knuckles. The fissures were filling with violet liquid from below the surface, the sap I had been drinking for months rising to the skin, pressing outward. I opened my mouth to scream. The sound that came out was not my voice. It was the sound of a forest fire, the collective harmonic agony of every tree burning simultaneously, every archive being lost, every collected voice escaping upward in smoke and violet flame. I was no longer Silas. I was the recording of the end. The tower tilted. The support beams gave. I fell into the canopy, and the canopy received me, and the branches closed, and the last thing I heard, the very last thing, before the amber sealed my eyes, and the roots took my voice, and the blackwood added me to its permanent collection, was the forest achieving something it had been working toward for 10,000 years. Not a scream. A song. A beautiful, devastating melody that moved through the burning trees and the violet smoke and the mountain air above the valley and explained, in the only language the blackwood knows, exactly why the world feels so empty when you stand alone in it at night. It's not empty, it's full. It's full of every sound that was ever made here, preserved and patient and waiting for the right conditions to play back. I'm not Silas anymore. I'm the third tree from the left, about 40 feet from the tower's remains. And if you stand very still in the blackwood tonight, if you let the wind settle and your own heart be quiet, you might hear something in the grain of the nearest pine that sounds almost like a name. It might be yours. The woods aren't just screaming. They're inviting you in.